Hi, GoodGolf here, with a brand new video on Forge networking in Unity. Today we will revisit the Authoritative Tank Game again, this time in way more detail, and I've added a few extras. So let's first show what we will be doing today. So I'm already running the server in the background, 2 clients, and this is immediately one of the new parts. So there will be a tank selection screen before the game starts, where you can either pick a Sherman or a Tiger tank. And you also need to add, let's say, the player's name here. So when we start the game after the selection screen, you can see that we can drive around in the tanks. It uses the standard physics, which isn't great, but will suffice for the demo. And in the background you can see the other tank moving now as well. And the sphere in the foreground of the scene actually marks the start position, something we will use later in the code as well. Okay, let's start really at the start, so let's first go to the authoritative movement example by Relic on Github, download the latest version, extract it, also go to the Forge nightly builds, download the latest package, the link to the nightly builds you can find it easily on the Forge Networking homepage in GitHub. So here we go, we've got the Unity package, so let's open up the authoritative game example. And here we go. Next, import the Forge Remastered Unity package and make sure during import to deselect the generated folder. After the import you will probably get quite a few error or warning messages in the console. Let's first add a few items to the network manager. So select the prefab from the Bearded Man Studios prefabs folder. Go to the prefabs from the authoritative movement example. And let's add those objects to the network manager. Increase the size of the arrays first. And then drag and drop the prefabs to each of the slots. As mentioned before, there's quite a few warnings here. So open the network contract wizard. Save and compile. Just clicking on them, opening them, save and compile a few. So the game manager first, the input listener next, and of course also the player network object. Okay, now it's time to add a few other assets. So we will be using the World War II tanks asset and also the Gaia asset. The Gaia 1.9 release received quite a few enhancements, so if you haven't used it in a while, you will see some major improvements there. I also include a few of the scripts we will use later on, and I will share the scripts through a link in the comments. So there's the auto-rotate tanks, players ready, players info, select tank and start position. We will use these throughout the video. So let's first create the player ready object in Forge. We will only add an RPC which will be used to send the player's name and the tank name to the server. Well, actually we will send it to all connected parties. You could do server only, but hey, why not cache the player's information at the clients as well. We won't be using it in this example, but typically you could use that in a game. So add the player name argument, tank name argument, and make sure they're both strings, and ready to go. So let's make a new scene for the tank selection. Add this scene as the second scene to the list, so we go to the build settings, add it and drag it up to make sure it's the second after the multiplayer menu. Make some changes to the camera. Also making a few changes to the camera position. We need the directional light to give a nicer image in the tank selection screen. Now we are creating a few empties underneath which each tank will be positioned. It's best to start with an empty, put the tank prefab underneath it, So if you have some, let's say, rotation issues later on, it's much easier to fix. We will do the same with the player objects later on. So we'll position the tanks a little bit apart. Now we go to the World War II tanks prefabs. So there we go. Sherman. Next is the Tiger tank. Let's add the auto rotate tanks script here. Give a nice effect during the selection. Here we go. We've created a tank material, we will use that later on. So here we go, let's add the mesh collider. Add the tank material to the material here. And select the mesh for each tank to add to the mesh collider. So it's over there, tank body. Same for the German tank. Interestingly, there's more meshes to the German tank, but we will just take the body. So if we want to select the tank, we have a large collider to hit. Another empty to hold the script. So here goes the select tank script. So let's take a quick look at the script. So the auto rotate script is fairly simple. It just rotates the tanks. The select tank script contains a check for clicking the mouse button, uses the raycast from the camera to see if we hit the tank, and if so, select the name of the tank and move that into selected tank. The player info is a structure used to capture the player ID, the player name, the tank name, player ID coming from the Forge networking. And we will add the info to a list which we want to keep between the scenes. The player ready script. So here we go. We've got the players list based on the player's info, structure or class. We use a player count to check how many players are into the game. We create the player's info list and make sure it isn't destroyed once we leave the scene. So the information is available in the next scene. Then we have a procedure for the player details, which sends the network RPC to all receivers, which will have the player name and the tank name in it. So this is the RPC, and basically here we receive the player name and the tank game, we check the player ID, we add the item to the players, and if we have a player count of 2, we can reduce that or increase that, then we basically say, okay, let's move to the next scene, which is the real game map. Because we use the tank name, we actually needed to rename the empties into the tank's name, so Sherman and Tiger in this case. And we will use that later to run the actual, to instantiate the actual tank for the player, the one you selected. So this is how it works. While you do nothing, it rotates the tank, and if you click, it will select the tank. If you click on the tank. So we will add a few user interface elements here. A text, an input field, and a button. So let's move that around a little bit and add the info here. Select the tank. That's what we're supposed to do here. Let's also change the color a little bit so it really stands out in the scene. Make sure we have a text hint here, what we are supposed to put into this box. Change the button name, and of course also link the button to the appropriate action. So on the onClick event, go to the select and start, and in select tank we got the start button click. And we add the player ready script to another empty, the selection manager, and then this scene should be almost ready. Just link a few elements to the select tank script. So the select and tank start. So select the text, the main camera, and the player ready components, and we are ready to go. So we create another scene, the map 1 scene. Make sure that gets added as the third scene here. Of course you can delete the original authoritative movement scene, but well, we won't get there anyway. So let's fire up Gaia. You probably need to install the dependencies first after opening the Gaia manager. Next, first on my list is always to set linear deferred mode. So let's do that. Open up the Gaia Manager again and let's start creating terrain. Advanced, create the Session Manager, show the Session Manager, click on the Random Terrain Generator, show the Terrain Helper, add the stamps, and of course you can make some changes to the type of terrain you want to have here, but we'll just use the standard settings. Stamps have been added, and play the session. Yes, of course we want to override, otherwise there won't be any scene to show. It takes a while for the Gaia to generate the terrain, but well, here we go. So the terrain is ready. Let's create a few of the spawners. And run each of the spawners. It typically takes a few minutes to create such a terrain. Of course, like many others, looking forward to the Gaia 2.0 version, which will likely include some code to increase the speed of this spawning. At least that's what we're hoping for. A new feature, we just clicked the Create Player, Post Effects, Screenshot of Skies, Water and Wind. So this is one of those new features in the latest release, and immediately you have a ready-to-go scene here. So next we're going to create a few spheres, which will act as the starting positions on our scene where the tanks can start. So first create one. We can take out the collider, we won't need that. Add the start position script, which basically is an empty script, but we want to collect these start positions easily from a script. We will see later how we can do that very easy. So clone a few of the start positions and position them on the scene. And of course you should typically add at least as many start positions as you will have players, and we've seen before that we can limit the player count in a game. Okay, start positions are done. Let's add the game manager. Put it on the 000 position. Let's take a look at the game manager script. Again, this one is based on Relic's code, heavily based on Relic's code. Few additions made, few changes made. So we add a few properties here, including the list of start positions, which we need to populate. So we will do that in the awake function. So we will check the players object, which is the list of players which we wanted to carry across the scenes. And there's also some code here. Start positions is a new list of start positions, and through the scene manager get all the start positions and put them in. Okay, in the network start we need to make a few larger changes, because in the current version, as it now shows, it uses the player accepted code. And interestingly enough, that has all been done in the, or that event has triggered in the previous scene, in the tank selections scene. So now we need to go through the list of all the players in the game, already in the game. So we are checking through the network manager instance networker players count. We go through each of the players, and we find the networking player. Then we're going to check if we have that player by network ID in that list we carried across from the previous scene, and if so, check what type of tank that user has selected so that we can instantiate the right one. As you can see, there's also a few errors in the script, so I've included a login procedure here because the server will be running headless, and I want to make sure I can log some things as part of debug. So that's why I will be logging to a file locally as well. So add the game manager script here. Save once in a while, makes sense. And now we're going to make a few changes to the player network. Like we've done in one of the previous videos, we need to make this into a 3D version, because the original one is 2D. So position becomes a vector 3, rotation quaternion. Make some changes to the interpolation here as well. We also need to make quite a few changes to the player script, changing it from 2D to 3D. Here we go. I've made the changes, as you can see in the code. Quite a few vector 2s need to be changed to vector 3s, and we need to include the rotation, which wasn't in the original code. So some of the 2D stuff has been removed. And here we see it, and the network object rotation has been added. Same in the fixed update. And from the previous video, I've included the turn tank and move tank. We do physics using Unity physics. It ain't great, but it works. So I removed the physics collision here and inserted the move tank and the turn tank into the player update where the input is being processed. Reconciliation is more or less the same, and there's a new correct error procedure which I only slightly modified, vector 2s to vector 3s. So let's start making the player prefabs. So again, we start with an empty. Add a few sub-objects, view and simulation. So we create a few sub-objects, view a simulation. Same as in the authoritative movement example, simulation actually isn't used. The view is used, I think, in the error correct procedure. So let's add the tanks underneath. And as I mentioned before, make sure you do that under an empty. So if you have a rotation issue later on, you can easily fix it in the prefab. So add the mesh collider here. Tank material again. The mesh to the tank. Mesh from the tank to the mesh collider mesh. Here we go. Add the rigid body to the tank. Here we go. Use gravity checked on, is kinematic off. Let's give it some mass. A little bit of drag. Let's create a prefab folder. And drop the player into the folder. Here we go. And let's do the same for player 2, which is the German tank. Make sure you delete the prefab from the scene. Add the rigid body to the top level. Oh, no. Add the player script. Add the German tank. Add the mesh collider. Add the rigid body to the player. And add this one to the prefabs as well. Next, we need to add those to the network manager prefab so that we can instantiate those players. So we go to the player network object, make it a size 2 array, and copy in our player prefabs. So index 0 is for the American tank and index 1 is for the German tank. Let's make a quick change to the multiplayer menu here. At the end of the start function, we want to include some code to make the server auto start, so that it immediately goes to the host function. So it checks the arguments, and if the arguments contain -autohost, it will automatically jump past the initial multiplayer menu selection and go into host mode. Okay, let's build. Create a subfolder for the build. Select it and go. Of course, this will take a while to build. Sped up the video a little bit here. Okay, the build has been completed. Let's make a shortcut here. And we will use that shortcut for the server, for running the server. So we will include the auto host, but also the batch mode to make sure it runs headless. Auto host added to the shortcut. Next, add the batch mode. Okay, let's run the server. Run a client 1, run client 2, oops, client 2 was behind number 1, so let's open that one. Make sure we've got that one as well. So here we go. We've got 2 clients running, 1 server. Connect. We get the tank selection. As soon as I click on one of the tanks, it stops moving. Add a player name, start, and that player is ready. Select the other tank in the second one, start. Now the server knows, hey, we've got 2 players. We shift to the next scene. And here we go, we've got the 2 tanks. So let's move this one first a little bit. Let's go to the other window. We will move the other tank a bit closer. As you can see, the physics isn't great in this demo. One way to improve it is to look at other assets. There are actually tank control assets which will do a much better job. And you could actually integrate that into the player object and you will see a much better result. Okay, hopefully this was a useful tutorial. If so, please like the video, and hopefully soon there will be another video, probably one of the last videos on Forge networking. And thanks for watching the video.